The king of nothing, the crystal chandeliers of the Viridian Hotel ballroom, cast 1,000 points of light across the sea of black tie gowns and tailored tuxedos. Elias Vance stood at its epicenter, a statue of impeccable taste and immense boredom. At 34, his empire, Vance Industries, was a sprawling digital leviathan that dictated trends and consumed competitors. Yet, as the gentle clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of sycophantic praise washed over him, he felt nothing but a hollow, echoing silence. He adjusted the cuff of his custom-fit shirt, his fingers brushing against the cold platinum of his links. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, his green eyes scanning the room with the detached curiosity of a god observing his creation. It was all his. The politicians who clamored for his endorsement, the socialites who vied for his attention, the rivals who seethed with silent envy. He had mastered their world so completely it had lost all flavor. The senators, hoping for a moment— "Sir," murmured Marcus, his assistant, materializing at his elbow with practiced discretion. "He's eager to discuss the data privacy." "Bill, tell him my support has a price," Elias replied, his voice a low, disinterested hum. "Triple the amendments in our favor, or he can find another tech giant to fund his campaign." He didn't bother to look at Marcus, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the gilded walls. Marcus nodded and melted back into the crowd. The transaction was complete. Another lever pulled, another puppet set in motion. Elias felt a familiar wave of restlessness. He needed air that wasn't filtered and recirculated, conversation that wasn't a calculated negotiation. He left the gala without a word to anyone, the engine of his low-slung sports car roaring to life like a caged beast set free. He drove without destination, the neon signs of the city blurring into streaks of color. Soon, the gleaming skyscrapers gave way to older, more resilient buildings, their bricks weathered, their signs faded. The air here smelled of fried food, an exhaust, not perfume and money. A sudden, primal hunger gripped him. Reminder he'd only picked at the delicate con-ops at the gala. On impulse, he swung the car into a small parking lot beside a diner called the Starlight. It was a relic, with a flickering sign and windows steamed from the warmth within. It was the absolute antithesis of his world, and for that reason alone, he was drawn to it. The bell above the door chimed his arrival, a sound utterly devoid of pretension. The air was rich with the scent of coffee, grease, and something sweet baking. A few patrons glanced up an old man reading a paper, a young couple sharing a milkshake, then returned to their own lives. He was just another customer. The novelty of it was startling. "Sit anywhere you like, honey. I'll be right with you." The voice was warm, like honey stirred into tea. He found a booth by the window, the vinyl seat cracking softly under his weight. He waited, his fingers beginning their impatient drumming on the Formica tabletop. Was accustomed to instant service. When she approached, he looked up and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with magazine covers or surgical precision. Her hair, the color of dark roast coffee, was tied back in a simple braid, a few wisps escaping to frame her face. Her eyes were a warm, intelligent brown, and they held a genuine kindness that seemed to look directly through the expensive suit and into the man beneath. Now, she wore a simple, pale yellow dress under a white apron, yet she carried herself with a quiet, unassailable dignity. "Sorry for the wait," she said, and her smile was a real thing, not a social tool. It lit up her whole face. "I'm Clara. What can I get for you tonight?" He found himself momentarily speechless. "Coffee," he finally managed, his usual commanding tone softening without his permission. "And whatever you'd recommend." She laughed, a sound that was clear and honest. "Honest recommendation? The tuna melt is a bit dry today. But my mom just pulled a fresh blueberry pie out of the oven. How about a grilled cheese and a slice of that?" He stared at her, as no one ever offered him honesty, only compliance. "You're very direct." "Life's too short for bad food," she said with an easy shrug. "I'll get that started for you." As she walked away, he watched her. She moved with an efficient grace, stopping to chat with the old man about his crossword, refilling the couple's coffee without being asked. She created a small orbit of warmth around herself, and everyone within it seemed to bask in it. It was a power he couldn't quantify. When she returned with his coffee, he decided to test the boundaries of this new world. "I don't believe I've seen you here before," he said, deploying the charming smile that usually made doors swing open. "I'm Elias Vance." She paused, the coffee pot hovering. "Should I know that, ma'am?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Slightly ingenuine question. A flicker of irritation sparked within him. "Vance Industries," he said, as if the words themselves were a key. "Oh," she said, her expression clearing into polite neutrality. "That's nice. I'll go check. On your sandwich." Nice. His multi-billion-dollar legacy was nice. Sought. He sat in stunned silence. He was so unused to being dismissed that he didn't know how to process it. The irritation faded, replaced by a deep, compelling curiosity. When she brought his food, he tried again. "This is excellent," he said, though he'd barely tasted. You're clearly very good at what you do. I could offer you a position at one of my corporate campuses. The benefits alone would change your life." Clara paused in wiping down a nearby table. "Thank you, that's kind. But I'm happy right here." "You haven't heard the salary," he pressed, leaning forward. "I'm talking about real money. Enough that you'd never have to work another day in your life if you didn't want to." She straightened up and looked at him, and for the first time in years, Elias felt truly seen. Not his wealth, not his influence, but him. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice still gentle, but now layered with steel, "I appreciate the offer, but some things aren't for sale." The words landed like a physical blow. "Everything is for sale," he countered, his voice dropping into a persuasive whisper. "Everyone has a price. Name yours. Designer clothes, a penthouse, a car that costs more than this building. You could have it all." Her smile was sad, almost pitying. "What makes you think that's what I want? Then what do you want?" he demanded, frustration bleeding into his tone. "I want to finish my shift," she said simply. "Go home and make sure my grandmother has taken her medicine. Get up tomorrow and do work that means something to me and the people who walk through that door. I want a life built on more than just money." He stared at her, completely baffled. "You're turning me down." "I'm not turning you down," she corrected gently. "I'm just not interested in what you're selling," the word echoed, in the silent, hollow places within him. It was a word that had been erased from his vocabulary for over a decade. It was inconceivable. He sat in that booth long after he'd finished his pie, watching her work. He saw her quietly pack up a piece of pie for the old man to take home. He saw her laugh with the couple, a real, shared moment of joy. She existed in an economy of kindness and connection, currency he had never learned to trade in when he finally left. Driving back through the now-sleeping city to his sterile, silent penthouse, her words played on a loop in his mind. "Some things aren't for sale?" He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights sprawled at his feet like a conquered kingdom. The first time, the view made him feel not powerful, but profoundly alone. Picked up his phone, Marcus answered. On the first ring, his voice alert, despite the hour. "Sir, I need you to find out everything you can about a waitress named Clara who works at the Starlight Diner," Leah said, his voice quiet but intense. Her full name, her family, her financial situation, everything. There was a pause on the line. "Of course, sir. Is there anything else?" Elias watched his own ghostly reflection in the glass. "No," he said, "that's all." As he ended the call, he realized the restless boredom had vanished. It had been replaced by something he hadn't felt since he was a young man building. His first company, a genuine burning curiosity. Clara had done the impossible. She had said no to Elias Vance. And in doing so, she had handed him the first real challenge he'd faced in years. He didn't know it yet, but his carefully constructed world had just begun to fracture. And the woman who would guide him through the wreckage was miles away, asleep, completely unaware of the earthquake she had just started. The pre-dawn light was a pale, watery gray against the towering glass of his penthouse. But Elias was already awake, staring at the detailed report Marcus had delivered hours earlier. The file on Clara Bell was a stark, black-and-white contrast. To the vibrant woman he'd met, it spoke of a life defined by quiet sacrifice, not conquest. She was 27. She lived in a small apartment above a bakery with her grandmother, Sophia, who suffered from a degenerative heart condition. Her younger brother, Leo, was an art student at the state university. His tuition and living expenses partially shouldered by Clara's 2 jobs. There was no car, no savings account, no lavish holidays, just a series of numbers that added up to a constant grinding pressure. Yet, the woman in the diner had smiled like she knew a secret to happiness he had spent billions failing to find. He found himself driving to the Starlight again the next morning, not in the Lamborghini, but in a more subdued sedan. The bell chimed its same friendly note. Clara was there, refilling sugar dispensers, her movements efficient and calm. She looked up, and a flicker of recognition and perhaps wariness passed through her warm eyes. "Back so soon?" she asked, not unkindly. "Hoping for more dry tuna melt?" "Coffee," he said, sliding into his now customary booth, "and conversation, if you have time." She brought the pot over, filling his cup. "Conversation is free." "What's on your mind, Mr. Vance Elias?" he corrected. "I've been thinking about what you said, about things not being for sale." She leaned a hip against the opposite bench, wiping her hands on her apron. And I think I disagree," he said, though his usual arrogance was tempered by genuine curiosity. "I think everyone wants something, just haven't discovered what it is you want yet." Clara studied him. She saw the intense focus in his green eyes, the same look he probably used to dissect failing companies or negotiate mergers. But she didn't see malice there. She saw a profound, almost childlike confusion, as if she'd presented him with a math problem that broke all known laws of physics. "What I want," she began slowly, "is for my grandmother to have a good day, where her breathing is easy and the pain is minimal. I want my brother to be able to focus on his sculptures without worrying about how he's going to pay for his next meal. I want to come to work and know that the coffee I serve and the smile I give might make a difference to someone who's having a hard time." Elias nodded. "A businessman latching onto a solvable problem. I can make that happen. The best cardiologists in the world, paid in full. Leo's tuition, his rent, his art supplies covered. You wouldn't have to work another day in your life. You could just be with your grandmother." "You're still not listening?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want you to fix my life. These aren't problems to be solved. They're just life. And life is about more than having all the obstacles removed." Frustration, a familiar and comfortable emotion, began to simmer in his chest. "So you enjoy the struggle? Like worrying about medical bills?" She moved to pour coffee for Mrs. Gable, the regular with the crossword, before returning. "I'm telling you that the struggle teaches you what actually matters. When you have to choose between buying your brother new paints or a new coat for yourself, you learn the difference between want and need. It makes the choices meaningful." "But you shouldn't have to choose," Elias insisted, his voice rising slightly before he reined it in. Clara did something then that she never did with customers. She sat down across from him. The vinyl sighed under her weight. "Can I ask you something, Elias?" The sound of his name on her lips, devoid of title or sycophancy, sent a strange warmth through him. "Anything. When was the last time you did something just because it was the right thing to do, not because it benefited you in some way?" The question landed with the force of a physical blow. His mind, a vast database of transactions and strategies, scrambled for an answer. Every charitable donation was a tax write-off or a PR move. Every kindness was an investment. Every relationship was a negotiation. Came up utterly empty. I support charities," he said weakly. "For the tax write-offs?" she asked, not with accusation, but with a gentle, knowing clarity. His silence was answer enough. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The touch was brief, simple, but it sent a jolt through him, a connection more startling than any corporate merger. Her skin was warm from the coffee pot, her fingers faintly smelling of soap and cinnamon. "I'm not judging you," she said softly. But maybe that's the wall between us. You live in a world of price tags. I live in a world where the most valuable things are priceless. Like what? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. As if on cue, the diner door opened, and an elderly woman with a walker shuffled in. Clara immediately brightened, her whole face transforming. Mr. Peterson, your usual spot is all ready. And I saved you the last piece of apricot Danish. I know it's your favorite. The old man's face, etched with the lines of a long life, broke into a radiant smile. You're an angel, Clara. You make this old man's morning. Elias watched, mesmerized. No money had changed hands. No favors were called in. Clara had gained nothing but the simple, profound satisfaction of making another human being happy. The transaction was one of pure human connection, and he felt like an anthropologist witnessing a sacred ritual he could never hope to understand. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias became a fixture at the Starlight. He told himself it was research, a psychological deep dive to find the leverage point he'd missed. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. He craved the clarity she possessed. He looked forward to the smell of coffee and the sound of her laugh. She tolerated his presence with a bemused patience, answering his questions about her life, listening to him talk about his work without being dazzled by the staggering sums involved. One rainy Tuesday, he found her looking drained, the usual. Light in her eyes was dimmed by dark shadows, her smile a fragile thing. Rough night? He asked as she poured his coffee. She hesitated, then sat down. My grandmother had a bad episode last night as the ambulance came. She's stable now, but the new medication they want to try. She trailed off, shaking her head. It might as well be made of gold. His instinct was immediate to pull out his checkbook and solve it. But the memory of her words stopped him. Instead, he asked, "Is she in pain?" She tries to hide it, Clara whispered, her voice cracking. She's been rationing her pills to make them last. I should have noticed. I should have found a way. For the first time in his adult life, Elias felt the urge to comfort someone with no expectation of return. He reached across the table and took her hand in both of his. Her fingers were cold now. You're doing everything you can, he said, the words feeling foreign yet right on his tongue. You work 2 jobs. You're there for her every night. She knows you love her. That matters. She looked up, her eyes glistening, and squeezed his hand. Thank you. I needed to hear that. They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined across the worn formica. Elias felt a tectonic shift within himself, a warmth that had nothing to do with acquisition or victory. He realized with a shock that he cared about her pain not because it was an opportunity, but simply because he couldn't bear to see it. In her eyes that afternoon, in his office, he did something unprecedented. He researched Sophia Bell's condition, not to find a way to exploit it, but to understand it. He found a nonprofit patient assistance program that provided expensive medications for free to low-income seniors. He made calls, not as Elias Vance, the billionaire, but as a concerned grandson, using his persuasion not for profit, but for purpose. He arranged for Sophia to be enrolled, but he instructed the program director to call Clara directly. He didn't want credit. He wanted her to have the joy of a random, unexpected act of kindness. The next morning, Clara was practically glowing. You will not believe what happened, she told him, her voice breathless with joy as she filled his cup. This program called out of the blue. They're going to cover all of my grandmother's medication. Every penny, they said someone had recommended her. Leah sipped his coffee, the warmth in his chest spreading. That's wonderful news. I keep thinking there must be a catch, she said, though her smile was radiant. Good things like this don't just happen to us. Maybe they should, he said quietly. Clara studied his face for a long moment, her head tilted. You. No, you're not what I expected when you first walked in here. What did you expect? Someone cold, someone who saw people as assets or liabilities. She refilled his cup, her expression thoughtful. But you're not cold at all, are you? You're just lost. The word hit him with the force of a truth he'd been avoiding for a decade. Lost. Yes. He had navigated the world with a map of spreadsheets and stock prices, but he had no compass for the human heart. "Maybe I am," he admitted, the words rough and unfamiliar. Clara smiled, and for the first time, he saw something new in her eyes. Not just patience or pity, but a glimmer of something that looked like affection. "Lost people can find their way," she said softly. "Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can." That evening, standing at his panoramic window, the glittering city below seemed to hold a new question. It was no longer what can I take, but what can I build? He thought of Clara's dream, not of wealth, but of a community art space, a place for people like her brother to create. And for the first time, Elias Vance, the architect of empires, wanted to build something not for profit, but for a soul. Starting with his own, the building was a forgotten giant. A hollowed-out husk of brick and dust on a quiet street 2 blocks from the starlight. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust and decades of neglect. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, mildew, and the ghosts of industry long departed. Elias stood in the center of the vast, empty main floor, his hands shoved into the pockets of a pair of jeans that had never seen a day of manual labor. The scale of the decay was daunting. "It's perfect," Clara breathed, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. Her eyes weren't seeing the crumbling plaster or the rust-stained floors. They were seeing potential, a future painted in bright, hopeful colors. Elias looked from a gaping hole in the ceiling to her radiant face. Perfect for what? A controlled demolition? She laughed, the sound bouncing off the bare walls. "For this?" She pulled a worn notebook from her bag, its pages filled with sketches and fervent notes. "This main room will be the gallery and event space. Natural light from those big windows. The smaller rooms in the back can be studios, one for painting, one for ceramics. Upstairs, we can build a digital lab for graphic design and photography. It'll be a place where Leo and people like him can create, learn, teach, belong." She spoke. Her vision began to overlay the dereliction. Elias, the master of seeing market trends and asset valuations, started to see it too. Not the cost, but the value. Not the challenge, but the purpose. "When do we start?" he asked, the words feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. "Right now," Clara said, her grin turning mischievous. She tossed him a pair of heavy work gloves. "Hope you don't mind getting dirty, Mr. Vance." "It's Elias," he said, pulling on the gloves. "And I have no idea what I'm doing." "That's the best place to start," she replied. "You get to learn." The education of Elias Vance began that afternoon with a crowbar and a wall of rotting drywall. His first yank sent a cloud of dust into his face, causing him to cough violently. His second pull was more cautious, less assured. He watched Clara, who attacked her section with a practiced, efficient rhythm. She wasn't just removing debris, she was reclaiming space. Leo, Clara's brother, arrived an hour later. Lanky young man with paint-splattered jeans and a skeptical eye. He shook Elias's hand with a firm grip, his gaze lingering on the billionaire's pristine, expensive sneakers. "So you're the money," Leo said, not unkindly, but with a clear challenge in his tone. "Today I'm the muscle," Elias corrected, hefting the crowbar. "Badly trained muscle, but willing." A flicker of a smile touched Leo's lips. "All right then, bad muscle. Follow me. We've got a mountain of junk in the back that needs moving." The next 3 months were a physical and emotional dismantling. Elias discovered muscles in his back and shoulders he never knew existed. His soft, manicured hands grew rough and calloused, stained with paint and etched with small cuts. His expensive clothes were replaced with thrift store flannels and worn-out boots. He learned to swing a hammer without smashing his thumb, to patch drywall until the surface was smooth, to sand old floorboards until the grain of the wood shone through. More importantly, he learned to work as part of an ecosystem. It wasn't his project, it was theirs. Anya, Clara's fiercely loyal friend, organized volunteer schedules and donation drives. Mr. Peterson from the diner, though frail, would show up every Saturday with a thermos of coffee and a box of pastries for the crew. his presence a quiet benediction. Leo, with his artist eye, became the de facto foreman for the more intricate work. Elias's old instincts surfaced constantly. When they needed a specific power tool, he immediately reached for his phone to order the most expensive. Professional-grade model available? Whoa, hold on, Leo said, stopping him. We don't need the Ferrari of nail guns. Maria's husband has one we can borrow. That's $500 that can go toward the new plumbing. When the painting was taking too long, Elias suggested hiring a crew to finish it in a day. No, Clara said, her hand on his arm, stopping him. The touch, now familiar, still sent a thrill through him. Speed isn't the point. When Anya paints that mural on that wall, it becomes her wall. When you sanded these floors, they became yours. This place needs to be built by the community it's for, so it makes it matter. He was learning. The currency here wasn't dollars, but time. Not efficiency, but care. One sweltering. Saturday, Elias was high on a ladder, wrestling with a stubborn light fixture, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat. Below, he heard Clara and Anya talking in the corner, their voices low. I still can't believe the king of Silicon Valley is up there getting electrocuted for a community center, Anya muttered in Spanish. Elias, who had been secretly practicing the language with an app for weeks, froze, his grip tightening on the wires. He's not who I thought he was, Clara's voice replied, also in Spanish. Her tone was thoughtful, warm. At first, I thought it was just another game for him, another conquest. But look at him, really look. He could have hired all of this done. He could have written a check, put his name on a plaque, and taken a photo for the press. Instead, he's here every weekend. He listens, he learns. He never complains. You're falling for him, Anya stated, her voice laced with both concern and wonder. There was a long, breathless pause. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't dare move. Maybe I am, Clara admitted. Her voice so soft he almost didn't catch it. The words washed over him, more potent than any business triumph. She was falling for him. It's not for his wealth or his influence, but for the calluses on his hands and the paint in his hair. For the man he was when no one was watching. When there was nothing to gain but the simple satisfaction of a job done well. Together, he finished connecting the wires with suddenly clumsy fingers. He flipped the switch. A warm golden light flooded the corner of the room where they were working, illuminating the dust still dancing in the air, and the surprised, beautiful smile on Claire's face as she looked up at him. You did it, she said, her eyes shining. We did it, he corrected, climbing down. The space between them crackled with unspoken words. He could see the confession in her eyes, knew she could see that he'd heard it. He reached out, not to take, but to offer, brushing a smudge of white paint from her cheek. His thumb lingered for a second against her skin, which was warm and soft. You had a little, he murmured. Her breath hitched. I seem to get a lot of those lately. They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the evidence of their shared labor. The air thick with the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, and something infinitely more tender. The distance between their worlds had not just narrowed. In this dusty, half-built sanctuary, it had vanished completely. He was no longer a billionaire slumming it. It was a man standing before a woman he was coming to love, hoping he was worthy of the gift she had just given him. The most valuable thing he had ever earned wasn't for sale. It was and always had been hers to give. The golden light from the newly installed fixture still seemed to hang in the air between them, a tangible thing charged with the weight of Clara's unguarded confession. Elisa's thumb remained on her cheek for a heartbeat longer, the rough skin of his work-worn hand, a stark contrast to her softness. He could feel the faint, quick pulse at her temple, a rhythm that echoed the frantic beating of his own heart. The world had narrowed to this dusty room, to the scent of her hair honey and sawdust, and the breathtaking vulnerability in her eyes. Clara, he began, his voice husky, wanting to give voice to everything he felt, to the transformation. Her belief was working in him. The moment shattered. His phone, discarded on a stack of drywall, erupted in a shrill, insistent ringtone he hadn't heard in months, the emergency line reserved for his board of directors. The sound was a bucket of ice water, A brutal yank back to a reality he'd almost forgotten. Clara flinched, the spell broken. She took a small step back, her hand unconsciously rising to where his had been, as if to preserve the warmth. "Should get that," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. He wanted to ignore it, to let it ring into oblivion. But decades of conditioning, of being the man who was always on call, always in control, were too deeply ingrained. With a frustrated sigh, he crossed the room and snatched up the phone. "This is Vance." "Elias." It was Julian Croft, his most senior board member. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual unflappable calm. "We have a situation. Catastrophic data breach at the Singapore server farm. The press has it. The stock is in free fall. We need you in the war room. Now." Elias closed his eyes. The details of the crisis already scrolling through his mind. The legal implications, the financial freefall, the reputational carnage. It was a 5-alarm fire in the center of his empire. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice automatically shifting into the cool, commanding tone of the CEO. He ended the call and turned to find Clara watching him. The warm, open expression was gone, replaced by a cautious neutrality he hadn't seen since their first meeting. The billionaire had re-emerged, and she was once again the waitress from the starlight, assessing a customer from a safe distance. "I have to go," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "It's a problem at work." "Of course," she replied, her tone polite, distant. "The world must need saving, Clara." He took a step toward her, but she took a subtle half-step back, crossing her arms over her chest. "Go," she said softly, not unkindly, but with a finality that felt like a door closing. "They need you." The drive to Vance Industries was a blur of frantic calls and grim-faced analysis streaming through his car's speakers. He walked into the corporate headquarters, and the transition was jarring. The smell of fresh paint and hope was replaced by the sterile scent of filtered air and anxiety. The comfortable work clothes felt like a costume amidst the sea of tense faces in sharp suits. For 72 hours, he was Elias Vance, the Titan. He barked orders, stabilized markets, managed the media frenzy, and contained the damage with a ruthless surgical precision that was both terrifying and brilliant. It was like slipping on a familiar heavy coat. It fit, was powerful, but for the first time, it also felt constricting. In the quiet moments between crises, his mind would drift to the art center, to the smell of coffee at the starlight, to the feel of Clara's skin under his thumb. On the third day, as the immediate threat began to recede, Julian leaned back. In his chair in the war room, "Hell of a job, Elias. You pulled us back from the brink. Again." He gestured to the flat screen dominating the wall, tuned to a financial news network. "They're already calling it your masterpiece." Elias followed his gaze. On the screen, beneath a banner that read "Vance contains catastrophe," was a video clip. It was shaky, shot on a phone, showed him covered in dust and sweat, laughing with Leo as they struggled to carry a heavy roll of insulation at the community center. The chyron below read, "Billionaire CEO's secret project, charity or tax dodge." His blood ran cold. "Where did they get this?" He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Does it matter?" Julian shrugged. "It's great PR humanizes you, and turns you from a ruthless shark into a philanthropist. We can spin this into a gold mine. Vance Industries, building communities as well as code. We'll schedule a press conference at the site tomorrow. Show them the progress." "No," Elias said, the word cutting through the room. "Absolutely not. Elias, be reasonable. This is a gift. We control the narrative." "The narrative is not yours to control," Elias snapped, rising from his chair. "It's not a PR stunt. It's private." Julian's expression hardened. "Nothing is private when you're the CEO of this company. Your hobbies are our business, especially when they involve significant, unreported financial outlays. The board needs answers, Elias. Are you funneling company resources into this pet project?" The accusation hung in the air, toxic and inevitable. He had been naive to think he could keep these two worlds separate. He drove back to the art center that evening, exhaustion weighing on him like a lead cloak. He found Clara, alone, just as he had days before. Sitting at a makeshift desk, going over supply invoices under the glow of his successfully installed light, she looked up as he entered, and the warmth he'd come to crave was gone, replaced by a hurt so profound it made his chest ache. "So it was a story after all," she said, her voice flat. She turned her laptop around. On the screen was the same news clip. A great human interest piece to buff up your image when you needed it most. "Clara, no. That's not what this is." "I didn't what?" she interrupted, standing up. "Didn't have your people film it? Didn't plan to use this place and these people as a backdrop for your redemption arc?" Eyes glistened with unshed tears of betrayal. "I told you my rules. No publicity. This stays private. If you're doing this for the wrong reasons, we stop. No arguments. We're done." "You think this was me?" he asked, his voice raw. "You think after everything, I would do that? To you, to Leo, to everyone who has trusted me here?" "I don't know what to think," she cried, her composure breaking. "All I know is that the second your real world called, you ran back to it. Now this place, our dream, is just a headline on a business news network. It was never real for you, was it? It was just another deal, another acquisition, and I was just part of the package." Her words were knives, each one finding its mark. He saw the entire edifice of trust and connection they had built over months crumbling into dust, destroyed by the very world he had tried to step away from. He could feel the choice crystallizing before him, stark and absolute. He could return to his empire, to the life of easy power and transactional relationships. He could let her believe the worst, let this beautiful, fragile thing between them die, retreat back into the hollow kingdom he ruled. Or he could choose her. He could choose this. Could risk everything he had built for the one thing he had never truly had. He looked at her. At the woman who had seen the lost man inside the Billionaire and had believed he could be found. Thought of her grandmother's smile, of Leo's grudging respect, of Mr. Peterson's Danish. He thought of calloused hands and shared purpose. The silence stretched, taut and painful. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. Each word a definitive step into the unknown. "Then I quit." 5 years later, the Starlight Diner hummed with its usual warm, familiar energy. The booths were the same, the coffee just as strong, but the air smelled of fresh-baked bread from the bakery below, Clara's old apartment, not of mildew and worry. Elias Vance sat in their usual booth, his fingers laced with Clara's. His hand, once soft and manicured, was now permanently etched with the faint lines and calluses of a man who worked with them. His other hand rested gently on the pronounced curve of Clara's belly, feeling the insistent, miraculous kick of their son from within. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked, swirling the last of her decaffeinated coffee. "The old life, I mean. Private jets, the power, the simplicity of it all." Elias considered it, his gaze drifting to the window where a spring rain was beginning to fall. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it," he admitted. "When the only metric was winning, and winning was a number on a screen. It was a simple equation. But," he turned back to her, his green eyes, once so cold, now warm and clear. "It was also empty. I had everything I was told to want, and nothing I actually needed." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, a gesture that had become as natural to him as breathing. "I used to think power was making people do what I wanted. Now I know real power is helping people remember who they are." Clara smiled, a soft, private thing. "Like you did for me." "Like you did for me first," he corrected gently. The bell above the door chimed, cutting through the diner's murmur. A couple entered, their clothes screaming of new money and imported fabric. The man, young and with a sharp, entitled face, scanned the room and snapped his fingers in the direction of Anya, who was wiping down a table. "Excuse me. We need a table. Now." "I don't care if there's a wait," he announced, his voice cutting through the warm atmosphere like glass. Elias felt his jaw tighten, an old, familiar reflex. His hands stilled on Clara's belly. But Clara simply placed her free hand over his and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. They watched. Anya straightened up, her expression neutral. She didn't cower or hurry. "Everyone waits their turn here, sir," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Regardless, it's part of the experience." She gestured to the small waiting area with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The man spluttered, but his date, looking embarrassed, tugged his arm toward the empty chairs. "Some people have to learn the hard way," Clara observed softly, taking a sip of her water. "Some people never learn at all," Elias replied. Then he looked at her, at the life growing within her, at the community around them, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "But some people do." As they walked home, the rain had softened to a fine mist that glittered under the streetlights. Their home was no longer a sterile penthouse, but a comfortable, lived-in house just 2 blocks from the now-thriving Starlight Community Arts Center, its windows glowing with the evening life-drawing class inside. Clara slipped her arm through his, her body leaning into his side. "I have a confession to make," she said, her voice light. Elias looked down at her, a mock worry on his face. "Ah, what kind of confession? Did you eat the last of the ice cream?" "Worse," she teased. Then her expression grew more serious. "That first night, when you walked into the diner, I knew exactly who you were." Leah stopped walking, turning to face her under the glow of a lamppost. "What?" "Your picture had been on the cover of 3 magazines that month," she said, a grin playing on her lips. "I recognized you immediately." A dozen memories rearranged themselves in his mind. Her feigned ignorance, her dismissal of his name. The entire foundation of their meeting shifted. Then why? "Why did you pretend not to know me?" "Because," she said, reaching up to touch his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, "I wanted to see who you were when nobody was watching, when you couldn't use your reputation or your money to get what you wanted. I wanted to meet the man behind the brand." Elias shook his head in stunned amazement. "What did you see?" "I saw a man who was desperately lonely, but too proud to admit it. I saw someone who had forgotten how to talk to people because he was so used to controlling them." Her expression softened, her eyes full of a love that still sometimes took his breath away. "But I also saw potential. I saw someone who could become extraordinary if he just learned to get out of his own way." "You saw all that in one conversation?" "I saw it in the way you looked at me when I told you no," she replied. "Most powerful men would have gotten angry or dismissive. You looked curious, like you'd discovered a new species, like there was still a part of you that could be surprised." He pulled her close, careful of her belly, and kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her. I had discovered that there were still things in this world that money couldn't touch." They walked the rest of the way home, past the community center, past the small park where he'd proposed on a blanket of snow, past all the landmarks of their shared history. "Thank you," he said as he held the front door open for her. "For what?" she asked, stepping inside and kicking off her shoes. "For saying no to me that first night? For seeing who I could become instead of who I was." He helped her out of her coat, his hands resting on her shoulders. "For teaching me that the most important word in the English language isn't yes or no." She turned to face him, her eyebrows raised in question. "What is it then?" He drew her into his arms, his hands settling once more on the life they had created together. "The most important word," he said, his voice full of a quiet, unwavering certainty, "is together." Later, as Clara slept, her head on his shoulder, Elias lay awake in the dark. The arrogant billionaire who had believed he could purchase the sun had vanished. In his place was a man who understood that true wealth wasn't measured in portfolios or power, but in the quiet moments of connection, in the legacy of kindness left in your wake, in the love that built a family and sustained a community. He had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the right no at the right time could be the beginning of everything, and that sometimes the humble waitress held not just a tray of coffee, but the key to a kingdom far greater than any he had ever dreamed of owning.